Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our SpedNet Wilton webinar with Dr. Jane Thierfeld Brown. I am Janine Kelly, co-president of SpedNet Wilton, and our other moderators today are co-president Carolina Corrigan and Eve Kessler, founder of SpedNet Wilton. We are very grateful for our co-sponsors of this webinar, Darien CPAC, Wilton SEPTA, and Wilton Public Schools, and we appreciate their partnership. Today, Dr. Brown will discuss post-high school and college planning for students on the spectrum. She has over 40 years of experience working in the field of disability services and is currently the director of College Autism Spectrum. She's a former assistant clinical professor at Yale Child Study and former director of student services at UConn School of Law. She has authored several books, including The Parent's Guide to College for Students on the Autism Spectrum. For more information on Dr. Brown, you can visit our website at www.spednetwilton.org or our Facebook page. Let everybody know, today's webinar is being recorded and the recording will be posted to our SpedNet Wilton website and also our Facebook page. Just a couple ground rules before we get started. Please feel free to ask questions at the end of the presentation through the Q&A button. Please don't use the chat. It's easier to monitor the questions through the Q&A. We'll do our best to answer the questions in the order they're received. And if you do have a long question that pertains particularly to your child, please understand that we have limited time here today with Dr. Brown. And if your question is a long one, you may want to just try to consult with her privately after the webinar. Also, just be mindful that, again, this is being recorded and we can't guarantee the confidentiality of your information. So just try not to provide personal information in your questions. Also, anything provided in this webinar by Dr. Brown or the moderators is not intended to be legal, therapeutic, or professional advice. It's simply meant to be for your general purposes only. And with all that being said, I'll turn it over to Dr. Brown. Welcome, Dr. Brown. We're thrilled to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you, Janine and Carolina and Eve, for having me. I'm so happy to join you this morning, and thank you everyone for taking the time. I am going to unfortunately close my little thumbnail pictures because I can't see my slides, but it's so much easier when I can see faces as instead of speaking to my laptop. We're going to talk about preparing students for college today, but the title of this is Preparing Students and Their Parents for the Transition to College, because this is truly a preparation for the entire family. We find increasingly that even if students are ready, sometimes their parents are not. And sometimes the parents are ready and the students are not. So we're going to talk today about what we need to think about as we look at post-high school, we're going to talk mostly about college, but most of what I'm talking about truly is for employment also. So again, this is general information. I'm not talking about any particular students or individuals, but we are dealing indirectly about students with autism. So let's get started. Where have families been? Some of you had a very easy time getting a diagnosis. For some, it was much more difficult. Sometimes people went from doctor to doctor or evaluator to another professional. And for some, it was really difficult. And for some people, coming to grips with the diagnosis was difficult. I meet with families sometimes that with a student who's already 17 or 18, and it's obvious that the family still has not accepted the diagnosis, or more importantly, haven't integrated the diagnosis into their family. I sometimes still see families that are with students at the end of high school, and they haven't disclosed the diagnosis to the student yet, which is very damaging to the student. And we can talk about that more later. Some of you had a very easy time getting services. I know Wilton is exemplary in providing a lot of accommodations. And some of you had an easy time getting an IEP and using those services, and some had a more difficult time. But a lot of what we think about in high school is the parent truly as advocate and CEO of that student's education. And what we're talking about today is moving that from the parent to the student. Because at 18, the student becomes advocate and CEO of their own education. And would you ever have someone become CEO without giving them some training time? Are we giving students any training time, or are we as parents doing everything for the student right up through high school? I say we because most of you, if you read the bio before today's webinar, you know I have a son who's 29 and has autism. So I'm one of you. I have been through a lot of the things you've been through. I've been through a lot of the struggles you've been through. My son's autism is very severe, so we didn't have the opportunity to think about college. But I've worked in colleges for a long time, so I really come at this as from both perspectives of parent and professional. So that training time is really important to look at your student as the advocate. Elementary and secondary school might have gone really smoothly, sometimes with lots of accommodation, but then it's the big decision. Is the student ready for college? Are the parents ready? And then the search. Where's the appropriate college? Because at graduation from high school, everything changes. The laws change that govern the student's education. Who's in charge changes because it's now your student. The expectations and accommodations change drastically, as do the temptations in college and the consequences for behavior. All of that changes. So this is from quite a few years ago now, CBS News, but I'm told by many college folks that this is more true today than it was in 2013. According to a study by the ACT, that high stakes exam, 89% of high school teachers believe their students are well or very well prepared for freshman level work. By contrast, only 26% of college faculty members think students are ready. And the faculty that I talk to every week say 26%, that's way too high. We have to teach students how to be ready for college, and even some of our better school districts. I think it's also very difficult this year with the pandemic and most people learning remotely. That has changed things drastically also. But how come that is true? Because college readiness is fundamentally different than high school competence. We see students who do so well at high school because it's a very different type of learning. It's more factual learning. But the current measures of college readiness don't do a good job of capturing what's necessary for college readiness. So who's the driver? In high school, it's all of you, the parents, the guardians, the teachers, the counselors. But in college, it's the student. The student is driving the process. The student, as you'll hear me say a lot today, the student needs to be driving the college search. For whatever reason, our generation of parents and subsequent generations really feel like we need to do this for the student. And what we know is that if the student is not doing the college search, then they're not going to be ready for college, because going to college is a lot harder than searching for a college. I see way too many parents that have just usurped the college search process, and the student needs to be intricately involved. So some challenges for the parents. I get these questions multiple times a week. So who's going to wake him up? He is. If you have a son or daughter, I'm going to call them your student. But if your student isn't waking themselves up and they're in 8th grade or older, they need to start tomorrow morning. No one is going to wake your student up. And if they can't go to class and they can't wake themselves up, it's really going to be a waste of money trying to go to college. Limited access because of the Federal Education Right to Privacy Act, also known to some as the Family Education Right to Privacy Act. There are some folks that believe that if their student signs a FERPA waiver, that they have access to everything. They don't. What signing a FERPA waiver means is if Disability Services wants to talk to the student or talk to a parent, they have to with the student present. They can never talk to a parent without the student present. Some schools interpret that a little bit differently, but for the most part, that has been tested in the courts many times. Some of our students with autism have not had the social opportunities that other students do, and many students haven't this year because of COVID. So many are more vulnerable when they get to campus, and students want to know who's going to be protecting the student. And the reality is, if a student's living on campus, and even if they're commuting to school, they really are on their own on campus. So we have to make sure that the students know how to be safe. Courses that are waived in high school will not necessarily be waived in college, and probably won't be. In college, it's very different. The faculty determine the curriculum, and they say what can and can't be waived, even with an accommodation. So many students who've had foreign language waived in high school, if the college is requiring a foreign language while you're a student, you may not be able to get that waived. And some parents really think that in college we can make students do things that you could not get them to do at home. And my reminder to parents is always, if you haven't been able to do it in 17 or 18 years, I'm not going to be able to do it in 14 weeks. It may take time to make some significant changes. So let's talk about some of the difference between high school and college. In high school, you have 5 or 6 hours a day of classes. We hope every student's getting 2 or 3 hours a day of homework. You're going to have frequent quizzes and non-cumulative tests, and most of the content comes from books or from classes. It's usually 20 to 25 students, and mostly in one building. And then you have the party, you graduate, you move on to college, where you're going to have 4 or 5 classes, 3 or 4 hours a week. So you go from having about 12 to 14 hours a day that are very structured, or at least pre-pandemic they were, between going to school, maybe playing sports or doing activities after school, any therapies or classes that you take. It's very structured. So that 12 to 14 hours a day in high school becomes 12 to 14 hours a week in college. And you have to be able to structure your own time outside of that. What we expect in college is 2 hours per day outside of class for every 2 hours that you spend in class. And you're going to have 2 or 3 cumulative exams per semester. And now research is mostly a primary source. You're going to have to integrate what you're reading in textbooks and what you're seeing in class in PowerPoints and taking notes and any optional or required readings the professor has given you. It's a very different kind of learning, and there can be anywhere from 10 to 300 or more students in a class, and you have the entire campus. So this is very, very different. A lot of my colleagues use the analogy that in high school, it's more getting facts and giving them back, where in college, it's integrating a lot of different material and then coming up with, we hope, alternate solutions. It's a really different experience, but it is, as we know, even more than that. It's about self-advocacy and self-management. Those are things that can be, and I'm putting in quotes, taken care of in high school, that someone is always watching out or reminding the student, don't forget, you have to hand that assignment in, don't forget, you have this due. Where in college, that's not going to happen. And so the student needs to develop strategies for how to do that kind of thing. And this is not just for college. This is for life. How do you remember your grocery list? How do you remember what you have to do for work? How do you know what you have to get to your boss? This is not, oh, gee, but let's just make sure they can get through college. These are life skills that we need to make sure our young people have. So the real question, are parents ready to allow students to transition to this next step? Are you ready to back off and allow these transitions to happen with your support, and to back off some of the prompting and reminding to allow students to develop strategies for that self-regulation and to allow them to develop the executive function? Because what we know, and what I hear from parents all the time is, oh, but Dr. Brown, you don't understand how bright my son or daughter is. Well, I do. I work with thousands of college students with autism over the years, many of whom have 4.6 GPAs out of 4 and have 172 IQ, which isn't even measurable at that end, and have perfect SAT or ACT scores. But we looked over the years at why are some of those students struggling then in college? And what we found through talking to hundreds and hundreds of students and service providers across the college is there's different things besides academic ability that account for college success. Are you resilient? Number one. Can you have some bad things happen and bounce back? And then social communication and interaction, which we know a lot of our students struggle with. But as simple as saying to another student, I didn't feel well and missed class yesterday. Can I share your notes? That's a social communication that can be crucial in college. Then executive function, which we know is that future planning and that ability to organize things, then self-regulation, and then academic ability, which surprised us all. We thought academics would be number 2 or 3, and it really was not the determiner for college success. So what is resilience? It's the capacity to recover quickly from difficulty, that grit or toughness. But the interesting thing is it's not something that you just have or don't have. It can be developed. So what we know is we need to work on 2 through 5 in order to develop that resilience. In the interest of time, I'm going to go through some slides rather quickly, but this one is important. And as was mentioned at the beginning, this is not legal opinion. I want to talk about the difference in laws between high school and college. I did work at UConn Law School for many, many years. I'm not an attorney. This is not legal opinion. This is information. So all of you know probably better than I, IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This is a federal law of educational entitlement. The responsibility falls to the parent and the school and ensures success. No student can flunk out of special education, and it guarantees that the student will go to the highest point the school can take the student to be successful. The services are based on evaluation, remediation, and special accommodations based on the diagnostic label in one of the 13 federal categories, which means you can modify grades, you can modify curriculum, you can do what's needed for success. Now, after you get that high school diploma, you move to the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Amendments Act of 2008, 2009. This is no longer federal law of entitlement. This is civil rights statute of eligibility. And the responsible party is the student, not the parent, not the school. And the student starts the entire process with self-disclosure, not parent disclosure, self-disclosure. So what we ensure is equal access to programs and services. We cannot guarantee success for anyone who pays tuition, whether they are neurodiverse or neurotypical. Our services at college are based on reasonable accommodations based on level of functional impairment in a major life activity. Totally different laws and looking at totally different things. So this is important. The other important thing to know is something called manifestation determination, which is something that's part of IDEA. And what it means is if your son or daughter in high school, if they have an IEP, if they've broken a conduct code of the high school, there has to be a determination meeting to see if their behavior was manifested by their disability. And if it was, it can drastically change the sanctions. It doesn't have to, but it can. Manifestation determination ends with the high school diploma, and it doesn't exist in the adult world, which includes college. So once a student goes to college, their behavior is something they are responsible for. And according to the ADA, even a student with a disability is responsible for their behavior. It's very important to know as if issues come up, because parents always say, but they can't hold my son or daughter responsible. They have autism. That's under IDEA, not under ADA. So we have to think about what the long-term goal is. And the goal is not just a piece of paper and a bachelor's degree. The long-term goal is that independent, successful adulthood that we all hope for our kids. So what we really want to do is encourage parents to allow the college faculty and staff to do their job by working with the student. If every time the student has an issue, they're calling mom and dad to solve a problem, then the student's missing a big part of their education, because the college doesn't have the opportunity to work with the student, and the student has no opportunity to learn what to do when something occurs. Because if the student's having a problem and they call mom and dad solve that problem for the student, where is the student ever getting the opportunity to learn how to problem solve? And why would someone think that they're magically going to know when they're working that they would know how to solve a problem? That's the issue that we really have to encourage. Because when you think about what most people want is the student to go to college and then later be employed and develop a career. But if all through college and young adulthood, the parents are solving problems for the students, like many of us had to do all through school for our sons and daughters, what happens when that person goes to work? Is mom or dad going to call the boss and say, well, my son had a problem with this assignment, and so you're going to have to give them some extra time? That's not going to happen in employment, and the student needs to know how to use their resources. And think about what you would accept if you're from any employee. What would you accept? Would you accept a parent calling to talk to them about what's wrong with the job? We have to think about these things and think about what kinds of opportunities we're giving our sons and daughters to learn and to train, to become that CEO. Because these are some of the things that I encourage people to think about in the transition, or when you're doing transition planning. When I meet with a student, the first time we usually meet with parents too, but after the first time, it's just me and the student. And I would want to know, you're asking for a note taker. Tell me how your autism affects you in class. What are you, and I might word it differently for a first year student, but what distracts you and why is it difficult to take notes? Well, number one, if the student doesn't even know they have autism, that's going to be an issue. And number two, what do they understand about their autism to help me figure out what they might actually need, so that I can start teaching those strategies that they can take through college and on to their adult life. What housing issues might they have? Hygiene or self-care? Does your student need prompting, or do they do all of that on their own? Do they take their meds by themselves? Do they refill their meds by themselves? Please let students do that and practice that before college. Let them do the ordering. Let them make the doctor's appointments. These are wonderful independent living skills. Do they have dietary issues, and can they advocate for them themselves? What about stress tolerance? What about transportation? Could they use a shuttle bus on campus? If not, then let's think about smaller campuses, because the large campuses, you have to be able to use transportation, and then any behavior and conduct issues that we have to think about. Executive function, the way I like to put it, is many of our students, and I have been as guilty as any parent, have a prosthetic frontal lobe, because all of the executive function happens in that frontal lobe. And that prosthetic frontal lobe is otherwise known as mom or dad, because we do a lot of the planning and organization for our families. And it really behooves us to try and back off and provide strategies so that our students can take over some of this planning and organization. And that list that we as parents run through in the morning, do you have your backpack? Do you have your lunch? Did you bring your homework? Do you remember you have a dentist appointment after school? That's executive function. Put it on a whiteboard. Let the students learn all of this. And then self-advocacy. Does the student know some of their strengths and challenges? Do they know what they're interested in? Do they know what works for them? Have they tried different things? And are the students allowed to speak up for themselves? Or are we taking care of that behind the scenes in the IEP? I don't want him or her to have to talk to any teachers about what they might need. Let's make sure it's all taken care of. No, just the opposite. Let the students start talking to their teachers in high school about their accommodations and learn that self-advocacy. So when they go to college, that's not one more thing they have to learn, because the students are going to need to talk to their professors about what their accommodations are. And you don't want the first time a student has to do that to be in college and when everything else is so different. You want to push the envelope a little bit. You don't want to have them try everything new all at once. I know I'm overwhelming a lot of you. This is a lot of information. And I know this is hard. I'm not thinking that this is going to be easy. I'm hoping a lot of you that are on with us today, your students are in the earlier high school years and have some time to do this. If not, you're not alone. There's many juniors and seniors that aren't ready for this. Many of them don't have autism or any other disability. We see plenty of students at college that aren't ready for this developmental leap. But if you can do a few of these things before your sons and daughters transition, it will make a huge difference. Because we know the motivation for students in order to have this next step of independence work, it has to come from within. We have to find what the student's really interested in and draw that out. And sometimes we have to break it down. And sometimes it's just saying to students, do you really want to go to college? And they'll say to me, I'll do anything to move out. I just want to move out of my parents' house. Okay, show me you're ready. Next week, talk to me about 3 colleges that you've looked at. Oh, I don't do that. My mom does that. No, if you want to move out, show me you can do the independent thing. Show me the colleges you've looked at and why. Why did you choose those? Sometimes it's a different person asking instead of mom and dad. That helps. If the student's only going on to college for mom and dad, it's hard to be successful. That external motivation, it just doesn't totally work. So if you say to your student, do you want to go to college? And they say no, let's think about some other things. Some students are much more successful going to college in their late 20s than they are at 18. And that can make a big difference. So I want to show you a few things. I know you can't see this very well, so I'll apologize in advance. I'm going to give you the URL in a minute. But this is a survey that helps identify for students, are they ready for college? And there's a partner survey called Is My Child Ready for College? It asks things like, I get frustrated easily, I give up easily, I have difficulty understanding what others say, I don't read social cues and struggle to maintain friendships, I don't like to read and I struggle to understand or remember what I read. And it sort of gives you an idea of what kinds of things the student is struggling with. It asks about stress and attitudes and comparisons. I struggle to accept that I have any problems. I have chronic health problems that require me to comply with ongoing treatment. It asks all sorts of things. And the parent survey has similar questions, but from a parent point of view. This is an excellent, and it's from the Wellbeing Center. It's excellent to give you and your student a view of, is the student ready? Or what do you need to get ready in order to take that next step? This is another one, mainly on academics, from Hamline College in Minnesota, Study Habits and Skills Checklist. This will give a wonderful idea. And this might be something, if you're having a transition IEP, this might be something to look at and give to your team at the transition IEP to be able to say, these are some things that need to be worked on. Because I do see too many IEPs where the transition goal is student will go to college. That's not a goal. That's at the end. That's an objective. You might really want to look at what kinds of steps is the IEP or the team taking to get the student ready to go to college. And that's the important piece. What I want to do now is show you a very useful document that hopefully, and I'm going to get out of my slides for a moment. I want to show you the this document, and I will give you the URL for this also. Whoops, sorry, wrong one. Give me 1 second to move something. I know you can see my screen, so you know what I'm having trouble doing at the moment. There we go. Okay, this is a document called Going to College by some my good colleagues at VCU, Virginia Commonwealth University. This was done in 2014 through a federal grant, and it's wildly underused. You can see the URL is goingtocollege.org. Use the hyphens or you get a totally different website. This is an online free resource that your student can do with their special education teacher or a social worker or guidance counselor. And it really walks the student through the entire process. I'm going to show you a few of things. Discovering college. What is college life like? Had I been able to use this a number of years ago, where I had a student who was incredibly bright and the family knew that the student wanted to continue studying and going to college, and the student was so anxious and couldn't even talk about it. And after I'd gotten to know the student and they trusted me a little bit, and I could say, explain to me what makes you anxious about college. And through many tears, the student finally said, I don't know how I'm going to eat there, and I don't know if they'll have food I like. And none of us anticipated that question. And yet what we didn't realize is it wasn't college and academics that was frightening this student. It was eating. They didn't understand the concept of dining halls. They'd never heard the term. This document goes through lots of that. And it's really important. It talks about differences between high school and college in lots of ways, about structure, classes, studying, tests. It's a wonderful document. I want to show you a few more things. It talks about faculty expectations and what students can anticipate in class. And some students have never heard of a syllabus until they get to college. It talks about professors and how to interact with them. It explains how students get accommodations. And this is really valuable for students to know before they go off to college. And then, very important, and in the interest of time, I'll only go to this, how to use resources. There are so many resources at colleges, and our students need to know how to use them. And it's not for the parents to do. It's for the students to be able to say, well, I'm having trouble. I need to go to the tutoring center. I need to go to the writing center. And this document helps students get ready for that, because it's very different in college, when the difference between in high school, where services are delivered to the student, and in college, where the student has to access the services. And that's something that a student needs to learn how to do. So I hope that that's a useful document for you. So going to college.org and the hyphens in between. Sorry, I knew I wanted to remind you of it. So now you've got the auditory and the visual. So I don't love the subtitle prep for high schoolers with disabilities, but it's a wonderful, wonderful document. I think I'm going to skip some of this just in the interest of time, but there's a wonderful introduction to one of their pieces in Asperger's Experts. That's an organization run by some folks with Asperger's. They do some good things and they have some good documents. And the one on teaching a soldier to knit is really good, talking about especially our students who get overwhelmed and are prone to more meltdowns, or just students who are very sensorily overwhelmed. And just briefly, it talks about a student being overwhelmed in a foxhole and the student's grandmother taking that opportunity to teach a very important skill, which is knitting. And that if the student is trying to fight off a war that's going on in their mind, trying to teach them a new skill is not going to work. It's really good if you can take the opportunity, because for some of our students, like this very brilliant biomedical engineering student once said, "The sun is too loud. It's as if everything I can see has a corresponding auditory of high notes and crashes, makes it difficult to concentrate, even to walk upright. It feels like everyone is talking at once and you don't know who to listen to." If that's the type of sensory overload a student is dealing with, are some of our college campuses that have so much going on the right place? And how do we find where that student can calm and when it's the right time to teach that student? This is what might be happening when you talk about college to your young person. They're just overwhelmed and the overload gets to be too much. So we have to do this at the right time. And sometimes for some of our students, especially those who get sensorily overwhelmed, take the time to just find a swing and let the student calm. It really can make all the difference in the world. For many of our students with autism, we know that this is a communication disorder and a developmental disability. And for some of our students, we need to give them the gift of time, because though they might be chronologically 17 or 18 or even 19, developmentally, they may be 12 or 13 or 14. And would we send a 12 or 13 or 14-year-old off to college and expect them to deal with the limited structure and independence? And only you know that about your own student. So how do we prepare now? I'm not going to go through each of these things individually because I notice that it's already 1:15, but you want to have a current assessment if possible from your school district. You want to address all of these things like strengths and challenges, medical information. What are the real accommodation needs? When I ask students, when I look at, I might look at an assessment and there's 3 pages of recommendations from an evaluator. And when I say to the students, so of all this, what do you use? Oh, nothing, I just use extended time on tests. Gee, but there's 3 pages here. I know, I don't use any of that. Okay. You really want to look at it in the evaluation and in the IEP. If all of the accommodations in the IEP have been there since 3rd grade, you really want to pare those down to what's really necessary. You want the student to understand their assessment. They're the one that's going to be working with the faculty and the Disability Services Office, and you really want them to have time to practice disclosing to teachers. We made it through. I can put that up again if people need it. These are some of our books. I'm very bad at the shameless self-promotion, much to my publisher's dismay. And this is how to reach me. Very simple, jane@collegeautismspectrum.com. So I'm hoping now that we can go to some questions. And I know that Janine and Carolina and maybe Eve have offered to read questions for me, because I don't think I can see them, but I'm happy to answer questions. Again, if they're very specific. Are there already questions, or should I answer the one that we've gotten one question so far?
There's a couple questions.
Okay.
I can read them out for
Sure,
you.
that'd be great.
First one is, my son is more impacted and college isn't going to be our path. What resources could you refer us to assist with placement, assisted oversight living, education in Connecticut area? My son is currently 19. A little different question, but.
Yeah, oh, that's fine. No, well, that's where what my son is in a day program in Bristol at the Bristol Adult Resource Center. There are day programs, and many of the day programs do job coaching and help with finding jobs. So if that's where your student is headed, it really depends. If the student has a 70 or below IQ and qualifies for DDS, Department of Developmental Services, then that's a different trajectory. If they're over a 70 IQ and do not have an intellectual disability, then usually vocational rehabilitation helps with job placement and coaching. So you want to look at the Bureau of Rehab Services for your district and get your student connected in that way. There are many places that do job coaching. The housing is a little more complicated. So if you can't contact me, I can give you some resources if you contact me on email.
Okay. So, sorry, I missed the top question.
Oh.
Are there any gap year programs that you recommend for a student who's high functioning on the spectrum and very smart, but struggles with the basic getting up, getting meals, more living skills?
There are few, there aren't a lot. There aren't a lot of programs because more and more school districts have been developing sort of two different tracks, one for more life skills. That's the type of program that my son was in. And some for folks who are less symptomatic with their autism, but have some more skills. As far as gap programs, there aren't a lot of 1-year programs. Some of the colleges offer some additional help in residence. Not the colleges necessarily. No, none of the colleges really do the residential help, but there are some colleges that have associated programs. They're private programs that are near a college. I guess, well, again, you can contact me. I'll be happy, because it's sort of like asking which college should my kid go to, and it depends on your kid, which it's the same with which gap year program. So again, yes, there are a few. They aren't common, but you can certainly, it would depend if you're looking in your area and you want to commute, or if you want your student to live there. Again, if you contact me, I'll be happy to give you the names of some if you tell me commuting or in residence.
So can you please share the link to the chart that was difficult to see? Was the in the slideshow? I think it was the
Sure.
checklist.
Yes, I'll be happy to go back to that. Hold on one second. This is do you want me to share the chart or the URL?
No, I think there was the link, the
Okay.
Wellbeing Center. Maybe we can stick it in the chat. Janine, could you stick it in the chat?
Oh, thank you, Janine. Yeah, all you have to do is the Wellbeing Center. Actually, if you put the whole thing, I think it's easier to find. Thank you.
So, okay, so here's another question. When is it time to start the conversation with the high school about planning and ensuring that both the school and family are on the same page for expectations? Many times the school can say it's too soon. When do you recommend pushing for conversations?
I like to take the 9th grade year, or the first year of high school, to transition to high school, because that's a big leap from middle school to high school. By the end of the 9th grade year, I like to talk about, okay, so what are the next 3 years going to look like, so that the student is ready for college. I think it's important not only for the team at school, but for the family also, because that way, there's a whole list of what I go through when I meet with students who are juniors. Like, are you doing your own laundry? What chores do you do around the house? Do you mow the lawn? Are you, sorry, Carolina.
Sorry.
Oh, believe me.
No, I get it. No, I get it.
I have had the 4-hour struggle with one of my, to get one chore done, and sometimes it's not just the student with autism that you have those arguments with, but as I frequently say to families, if your kids are living in a hotel because you're afraid of them having a breakdown because you asked them to do something, how are they ever going to be independent? And I hear that from so many families, and I do get that. I really understand that asking your kid to empty the dishwasher is going to set off a 4-day tantrum. I get that. I've lived it. I understand. But then how can we even talk about college? And why are we talking about college if the student is not doing any independent living skills? I think that, we really have to think about what are our basics. For us, it was, and I have the student, my son who's autistic. I have another child who received services in college. And I said very plainly, I will write the check for your deposit when you show me the return email from Disability Services that you've contacted them and made an appointment, and I'll help you get the materials ready to send to them. I didn't get, oh, sure, Mom, I'll be happy to. That was what the structure we set up. We will pay. You need to use the services, but I don't want to. You're welcome to stay home. You're welcome to. You got a nice room right here. There's things that we have to decide, and we have to make sure. I think that there's things that you have to decide as a family, what are you ready to do? So you have to make sure some of those things are that you're implementing some independent living skills, and that the school is doing their part in helping the student to get ready, and that you're doing your part and not expecting the school to teach those types of independent living skills. It's a two-way street, that you're expecting the school to do their part and they're expecting home to do their part. So I don't think you can do that too early. I think making sure that everybody's on the same page of where you're headed and what you would like and what the school wants you to do at home. I think that's when I know it's working, because all I know is when you're fighting with the school, the only one suffering is the student. So the more you can do to work with the school, the better off everybody is. I don't want to ignore get one question in advance, and it was from someone whose student is at a therapeutic school. The transition from a therapeutic school to college, the usual biggest difference is class size and number of people you're around. A lot of the therapeutic schools, the largest class that someone is in is anywhere from 2 to 12. And that's obviously very different going off to college, where the average class is going to be anywhere from 20 to several hundred. So you may want to look at a smaller school if that's going to affect the student, and you want to look at more time to get ready. There are many, many students coming from therapeutic schools to college now because there's more therapeutic schools. And I think it depends if the student is living there or if the student's commuting. And it depends on the size of the school and what kinds of accommodations are needed. There's some things that just don't happen in college. And this is for everyone, not just someone at a therapeutic school, but I do want to mention this. If your student is, say, a junior or senior in high school and still getting study guides, you want to stop that now. When I ask students, tell me how you study, and they say, I get a study guide, I memorize it, I get an A. That tells me the student's not ready for college. That's one of those students that is well or very well prepared according to the high school and then is not ready for college. Our students need to take that opportunity in high school to learn how to study. And if study guides is the only thing that's teaching them how to study, they're not going to be ready. So please remove that as an accommodation as soon as possible. College, nobody gets study guides, and it's never going to be an accommodation. If the student who is at a treatment, a alternative high school, if they have a one-to-one aide, that also doesn't happen at college. Occasionally at a community college, and I say occasionally because most community colleges don't allow it. If the aid is for behavior and focus, community colleges won't allow it. Occasionally there's one that will, but that has not been successful so far. So I think it really depends. And if you want to contact me afterwards, I'm more than happy to talk you through what might need to happen.
So another question, my high functioning Asperger's son graduating in June has no desire to become an independent adult despite our openness to any path, not just college. It's creating a lot of tension in the household and family. How can I get my spouse to understand that might be a slower process, but fighting it makes it worse? And how can I help my son to move forward?
Excellent question. And often it is between the two parents more than it is between the parent and student. And that's what's difficult. Though whatever's between the two parents, of course, it comes off to the parent and student. I think you're right on target, where if your student is not ready and needs some time, and again, I call it the gift of time, to give our kids a chance to catch up a little bit. It's hard to get some parents to that idea. I said to a family this week when the student said, I tried college. I had to come home after 2 days. I don't want to live at college anymore. And I said, okay, well, we can look at commuting to college, but is that okay with mom and dad? And they both said, of course. And I looked at the student and I said, that's okay. That's something that's okay with your family. And the student got really upset. Why wouldn't that be okay? They're my parents. Why wouldn't? And I explained to the student that many parents are ready after they've done their work for 18 years and they're ready for the student to leave. And some parents say, no, it's okay to stay. And some say, no, it's time to go, get a job, pay your rent, and do what you're supposed to. That is a really different philosophy, and it's certainly not an unusual one. So I think maybe if the husband or the father can make an arrangement and say, okay, you get another year, you get another 2 years, whatever it is, and so that there seems to be an end point, because that probably is what he needs, to know that this isn't going to go on till the person's 26 and they're going to be sitting home playing video games. That's often what the parent is sort of fighting against, that idea that the student just isn't going to do anything. The other thing is, okay, you don't want to be independent, but not going to college and not having a job is not an alternative. You may not just sit home. So I think it's what you've got to get the student to agree to, and then the dad to agree to. The student's not just allowed to sit home. They may not be able to be independent, but they have to get a job. We didn't talk a lot about getting a job. That really is the most important thing, even in high school, even if your student's working 2 hours a week or 5 hours a week or volunteering. And for this family, a few hours a week of work might be the most useful thing, and will also show the dad that the student is trying. So please don't let the student just stay home. If they don't want to be independent, that's one thing. But they do have to do some adult activity, which means either going to school or going to work. And then I think having someone maybe besides mom explain to the dad that our folks on the spectrum need a little more time. I do want to, I understand why everyone is using the term. I just want to let you know that in college and professionally, we don't use high functioning and low functioning in autistic terms. I want to let you know that, just because someone at some point is going to change the language for you. That stopped being used a number of years ago, because what we found is that people who we were calling high functioning needed more support in some areas than those we were calling low functioning. So sometimes people say, well, they need more support academically, or they need more support with life skills. I know sometimes we fall to that high functioning so that people understand that we're talking about someone who is on a college track, or is not in need of one-to-one support, or doesn't need residential supports. And I know for some people, it seems clearer to say high functioning or low functioning, but just so you know, those terms really aren't used. when we talk about college, I think most people assume it's someone who is academically more capable and does not have an intellectual disability. But we do have some people with intellectual disabilities at college also. So it gets the language gets rather confusing. So I think that that's a long and difficult answer for a difficult situation. I think when one parent is ready to let the student stay home and the other parent is saying, no, go spread your wings and fly, but the student's not ready, see if you can go year by year instead and reevaluate after a year. But the student cannot just sit home. They can't. And that has to be an agreement for the student too.
So we have about, I think we have 5, 6 questions left.
Okay.
Is there a good resource online or other that offers assessment on college suitability for students with autism? She's assuming some schools are better than others.
College suitability. I would say no, and if there is one, don't trust it. Because if you just had to fill something out, I would say, it's so individual for each student. The questions you want to ask, do you want to be in a city? Do you want to be in a suburb? Do you want rural? Do you want big or small? Do you want to live on campus? Do you want smaller classes or bigger? There's so many different things that it isn't just something to fill out. I think if your student needs more support, the general supports that students are going to get, and this is an important thing to explain, there are services and there are programs, and let me explain the difference. Every college in the country that receives any federal funding, which is every college in the country, has to provide disability services and accommodation. So they have to level the playing field and provide that equal access. That means extended time on exams if the student needs it, and the documentation is what we have to look at to determine what the student needs, and there's the discussion with the student as to what they need. So the things like extended time on exams, note takers, a single room because of the autism that you might need a place to calm. Those kinds of things are services that every college offers. A program is usually fee for service because it's above and beyond what's federally required by the college. And there are about 70 schools in the country. By the end of this year, there'll probably be about 75 that offer specialized autism programs that are smaller, anywhere from 10 students to maybe 100. Then they offer more one-to-one. They'll have meetings each week. They'll help teach some of these strategies we've been talking about. They'll work on executive function and structure, those kinds of things. And some are more elaborate and some are less structured. In all of those programs are listed. There's several lists online. There's one on my website, collegeautismspectrum.com, and that's by state. So you can look at that list and see where the colleges are. In Connecticut, there's one at UConn, the Beyond Access program. Outside of Connecticut, the state that has the most is Pennsylvania. They have 11 colleges with programs, and each of the programs is very different. You can get more information on their websites, and on my website, I have a link to each of the programs' websites. And so that might be helpful.
Okay. So this is a neuropsych question. So district originally offered neuropsych exam after 16. So adult testing instruments can be used. Now saying we'll only do a transition assessment. Now programs like Landmark, ARC at Dean, and Thames at Mitchell require testing for applications. Is
Yes.
this sort of testing part of regular transition assessment, or do we need a specific neuropsych psych ed eval?
Ooh, depends on the college. Places like Landmark, Curry, Mansfield Hall, Thames, they're going to ask for a recent assessment. Recent meaning in the last 3 to 5 years. The fourth grade assessment isn't going to do it. It's rare that I think if a school district is saying they'll do a neuropsych, fabulous. Most school districts won't. I know I had to pay for my kids' neuropsych. So if they'll do it, wonderful. Will the transition assessment do it? Depends on the program. You really have to ask each program because each program might be looking for something different. Usually, this is only usually, I can't say definitively for any of the programs. Usually they're going to want documentation through testing, not just a transition assessment, but they definitely want the transition assessment too. So I would make a
Okay.
neuropsych appointment just in case, because it takes so long to get those reports.
So here's another, my student is a high functioning senior and thinks he has everything under control, but he doesn't, and is consistently behind in his schoolwork. He functions below his ability. Do I help push or let him fail and figure it out?
I'm going to give you the answer you don't want, which is it depends. But I would certainly say I'm a big proponent of, if you've been pushing for a lot of years already, which I got to assume you have, I'm for the let them fail and they need consequences. Because what I find frequently is we wait until college for the student to fail. And the message we're sending to the student is, even if you don't do everything, you're going to get rescued. As one high school professional said to me a few years ago, well, how can I say I won't accept his paper when it's the best thing I've ever received in my teaching career? Well, because if it's 2 months late, then really what the message you're sending to the student is, you give me things whenever you want, and I'm still going to grade it and not penalize you for it, which is not going to happen in college or in life. So we really need to think about what we're teaching and the long-term effects. So I'm a big proponent of, let's see what happens. If the student fails, are you worried about the student failing? Are you worried about your reaction to the student failing? That's part of what we have to look at. And then let the student pick themselves up. And if they don't, then we say, okay, you need help with this. Let's see how we can help you. Because again, if it's all external motivation, the student is not buying into this and it's not going to work. It's got to be internal. But the only way some people develop that internal motivation is through failing and having consequences sometimes. Some of our students have never had consequences. We call it the, well, as one of my deans at the law school used to say to me when I would say, oh, the helicopter parents. And he said to me, Jane, my wife is not a helicopter parent. She's a Black Hawk. She's on the ground fighting, and that's just it. Now at college, they're called snowplow parents. They're just clearing the way for the student. We're trying to teach our students how to be successful adults. Is someone always going to be there to clear the way? Or are we giving them the opportunity to learn how to be that advocate and CEO of their own life? That's really what we're looking at. So I say, let the student fail. Let's see how they feel when they fail, and then offer to help them find solutions. Don't find the solution for them. Help them find the solution. Don't ask why. Why did you fail? Don't ask that. How are you going to change this? When a student comes to me really upset that they failed an exam or that they didn't get their assignment in, my response has to be, how are you going to make up those points? Let's talk about that. I want that student to then use their resources to figure out what's next, not wallow in the, I failed, fix this for me. No, how are you going to make that up? How are you going to not let this happen again? That's what we're looking for.
Excuse me. Excuse me.
Of course.
Oh, Can you give parents specific examples of good transition goals in high school to ensure students actual receive specialized instruction to master becoming ready? Doesn't the high school have to meet all these areas of core transition skills?
Yes and no. Yes, they absolutely do, with the other 1,010 things they have to do. And yes, I would love to see high schools spend more time on this, but it depends what else we're asking them to do. If we're asking them to accommodate or over accommodate while teaching all of this, they may not be able to. So I think that's when this last thing in the transition meeting, pare down to bare necessities and accommodations, that's what also makes time. It allows the student to start learning to do some things that they need, and it gives time for the team to teach what might be necessary. So looking at these, you can use this as a structure for those transition skills. Is the student ready, that they know their strengths and weaknesses, that they understand what their disability is all about? And I think this would probably be a good time to mention, I know some of you might be reluctant to tell your student what their disability is, or that they have autism, or as I like to say, the parents who call me and say, well, our student doesn't know they have autism and we don't want you to tell them. And my first question is always, why are we whispering? You know, that tells me the family has not accepted the diagnosis. They're keeping it from the student. And I'm sad to say how many students I've had to tell that they had autism, not knowing that they didn't know, because no one ever told them, but it's right on their assessment. And I can tell you that any student that you're not telling, they think whatever they have is much more serious. I was saying to the group earlier before we started the webinar that I've heard pretty much everything from students who weren't told that they have autism, including when I say something like, so tell me how your autism affects you. And they say, I have autism. And all I can say is, gee, I'm sorry if I'm the first one to tell you that. And the response from some students has been things like, I'm relieved. I thought I was a sociopath. I thought I was psychotic. I thought I was schizophrenic. And I can go on. And unfortunately, that's probably happened to me about 100 times. If you haven't told your student, please tell them as soon as possible. It's really crucial. They deserve to know what they're dealing with and be able to develop their strengths around it. People are right now the self-advocates are encouraging people to be loud and proud. And so we need students to know. So as part of the transition, you want them to understand what we know is successful students accept and understand their disability, so that they need to have that as part of the transition. You want to take away all the unused accommodations and make sure the student knows what they need and how they need it. If only the parent knows that, that's not going to work at college. So I would include all of these things. And actually, yeah, I'm very bad at this, I apologize, but in our parent book, there's a really extensive list of what to include as transition goals. And that may be helpful to some folks.
Dr. Brown, we are at 11:15. Are you able to stay a little longer? We do have a number of questions.
I can do a few more questions if people want to stay, sure.
Great, thank you.
Of course.
Okay, so do you recommend the college programs offered specifically for kids with disabilities, for example, UConn's Beyond Access program?
For the right student, of course. Yes, I'm hesitant to say I recommend this program because it really depends on the student. For a lot of students, UConn would either be too big, or if they're looking for a city, it's in a very rural area. I think the UConn program is terrific for the right students, yes.
So if you think the transition program that is offered by the high school for after graduation is not high functioning or appropriate for your son, daughter, What is your recommendation to help get them into the outside, like a different transition program at WestCon or Post? Or
Um,
just maybe a different program? Mm.
what's my recommendation? I think it depends on the student. I think if the there are several programs at some of the community colleges. They have transition type programs where the students take one college course a semester and get a lot of assistance on the outside of the classroom. Those are through the community colleges and usually are very, very good. There are some residential programs for transition that are very good. What do I recommend? I guess I'm not sure. It would really depend on, again, it depends on the student. Are you looking for residential? Are you looking for more academic? Are you looking for life skills? So I'm hesitant to say try this program because it really depends on the student.
So is college accept IEP? What, I'm assuming that's a question if they accept an IEP. What's the benefits of community college versus public college?
Okay, so first of all, colleges don't
Mm.
accept IEPs. We don't follow an IEP at college. IEPs end with high school. There is no IEP in college. We'll look at the IEP to see what kind of accommodations you got in high school, but that's the only thing. Disability Services decides the accommodations in college. We don't follow an IEP. We also don't follow a 504 plan. There are some myths out there that the 504 plan goes right through college, which it does not. Disability Services or Access Services reviews documentation, will review things like an IEP or 504 plan. They'll look at what courses you're taking, and then they'll determine your accommodations. So, and does it matter public or private college? No. Any college that receives federal funding, which is all of them for federal financial aid, and other things, of course, they have to provide equal access, and there's someone assigned at the college to do that.
We have a question, another curious if the Naviance College and Career Readiness web-based program specifically addresses students with disabilities.
There is not a section on Naviance that gives you, fill in what you're looking for accommodation wise or disability wise. But in Naviance, it can help narrow your search to reasonable colleges for you to apply to based on the credentials that Naviance already has inputted. If you're looking for services beyond, that's a good place to start with the Naviance list and then move on from there, looking for the appropriate accommodations. I guess this is the point to say, again, I'm sorry, this is not meant to be a marketing tool. I do college counseling, individual college counseling. So if you're looking for that and you're confused about some schools, you can certainly contact me about scheduling something. But Naviance is or a similar program. If your high school uses it, it's a great place to start.
My son was a freshman at Norwalk Community College. They were very hostile about accommodating him. He just switched to, I'm assuming that's WestCon or WCSU,
Yes.
where they are more than willing to help him. They've allowed him to substitute technical writing for the English composition writing, which he struggled with at NCC. What accommodations could he ask for?
I guess my question would be, what could he ask for? It depends what he needs. It depends what classes he's taking. It depends what he needs. If he's taking a lab class, he'd need very different accommodations than if he's taking public speaking. So it really depends. He can ask for anything. It depends what he'll get. I'm surprised to hear that he had such a hard time at Norwalk, because usually the community colleges are so good about accommodations, but WestCon is excellent. Their disability services are amazing. And I'm disappointed to hear that he didn't do well at the community college with accommodations. He can certainly ask for extended time if he needs it, and his documentation backs that. Note taking, again, if he needs it, any accommodation that his documentation would back, I'm sure they discuss. But WestCon is excellent at talking to each student about their classes and what they might need in each class. So if he needs help with that, he, in an appointment with the disability services specialist, with Elizabeth, their director, or one of the other people, he should say, I don't know what to ask for. Can you help me?
Okay. A couple more. We have about 4 more questions. What's the best way to search for these various transition and disability service programs?
The websites really will show you. Any college website will have disability accommodations or disability services listed and should have a page. The transition programs, if you look them up, a lot of them are at the community colleges. The ones that are not are usually for people who are more symptomatic with their autism, and have the ones that are outside have more of a life skills approach. So there is a list at, I think it's at CPAC, the Connecticut Parent, anybody know what that?
Advocacy Center.
Thank you, Parent Advocacy Center. CPAC has something on transition that I think should be helpful. And if you're looking for more than that, I think CERC, the Special Ed Resource Center of Connecticut, they have a list also of transition programs.
So we have another question, probably actually from one of our school. What's the transition assessment that you recommend?
Oh, let's see. There's a few. I like to do a combination, really. What I like to see for transition assessment, I like one of these college assessments that I've shown you today. I think that gives us an awful lot of information. And some of them do have one for the student, one for an advisor, one for a teacher. I like the self-determination assessments. Those are incredibly helpful, especially the one by Sharon Fields. I really like that one. And there's one on how to prepare for college. And that has a student, an advisor, and a parent, advisor meaning teacher, and a parent, so that you get all 3 views, which I think is incredibly helpful. And that way it can help really guide the transition. I also, when it's possible, I like to have a brief. A brief is a, I'm not going to remember the acronym, but it's the test we look at for executive function. I think that really helps so that we can see where the student is executive function wise, because executive function is just so crucial for college. Most of the students, when I say, can you show me your calendar? And they'll say, it's all up here. And I say, that's not going to work at college. We got to get students to be able to start to learn how to structure their week, and getting some sense of where they are executive function wise can give us some good transition goals for high school. So I like a combination of all of those.
So we have, this is more of a diagnosis question, but speak more about coming to grips with a ASD diagnosis. We never used labels, only strengths and weaknesses along with coping strategies. It would crush him and worry about self-esteem. Yes, he needs to know, but he will need significant support to work through it. Is there something you do in your practice?
Is this something I do? I do some of it. I think really what the person needs is a therapist that they're meeting with every week. And I think a lot of our students really need that. And I don't see a lot of it because especially, and part of it's in Connecticut, but part of it is across the country, we don't have enough mental health professionals who really understand autism, who really understand that just talk therapy doesn't always work with an individual with autism. It is important that your student understand what their issues are. And I'm not sure it would crush them. Of course, I don't know your student and you do, but again, are they thinking it's something else? Are they thinking, do they know why they might be different or they might think differently? I would ask a lot of those questions or have a therapist ask those questions, because sometimes the student thinks they're protecting you. Maybe they think you are the one that might be crushed. I can't tell you how many times families have said to me they would be crushed to hear they have autism. And when the student hears it from someone like me, they say, oh, I know. So I think it really depends, but a therapist should definitely be the one to work with the student towards that. And that might be really helpful, because then also your student can then start to find a community. So many of our students really enjoy talking to other people with autism who view the world the way that they do and that share a lot of similarities, and keeping that from them is difficult. So it really can be more helpful than hurtful. But of course, your student and your family best. So I think a good therapist that they see regularly could be the most helpful.
All right, so we got last question here.
Okay.
I'm not sure if my son is able to live in a dorm.
Mhm.
Are there specific skills you believe a student must have in order to be successful with living in a dorm?
Wake themselves up, take a shower without prompting, um, brush your hair, brush your teeth. No, all those hygiene skills are really important. And being able to live in a community situation. You're going to be around a lot of other people. Request a single if you think the student needs some privacy. A lot of our students just need a place where they're not overwhelmed sensorily sometimes. And sometimes all that negotiating with a roommate can just be too much. Parents will say to me, but my student needs a friend. You can have a friend that's not your roommate. And sometimes our students just need some downtime. So all of those things, and just being able to know what they need to go off to class in the morning, to be able to say, okay, I need to make enough time to go to the dining hall, get something to eat, and go to class. So that executive function, we call that, that future planning that comes naturally to a lot of parents, because we're doing it constantly all day. Most of you are doing it right now in your head. And for our students, because somebody else is doing it, they don't learn it too much. So those are the kinds of things we really need in order for somebody to be ready to live on campus, so that we're not worried, gee, they haven't eaten more than a candy bar all week because they can't figure out time to go to the dining hall. Some of those independent living skills would be really important. So that's it, Carolina.
Yes,
Great.
that's it.
Got through all the questions. I'm happy to answer more on email. You all have my email and on my website. I want to thank you again for having me this morning. I so appreciate all of your time and for staying with us this long. And thank you for all you do for your students. You wouldn't even be having this conversation without what all of you do for them. So thank you for all of your advocacy and for getting them this far. And we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you to our co-sponsors, the Darien CPAC, the Wilton Public Schools, and the Wilton Special Education PTA. Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Brown. This was awesome.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. It was
Dr. Brown.
great.
Thank you.
Just one more thing before people start to drop off. Dr. Brown's book, The Parent's Guide to College for Students on the Spectrum, I personally highly recommend. And it's definitely a must read for any parent. And it doesn't just apply to students on the spectrum. So definitely read that book.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Brown.
Bye.